A bit of logic will tell you that the young person standing next to me can only be my granddaughter, who has contributed materially to the intellectual material that I'm going to present to you. The blazon in purple and gold simply lists the most crucial criteria for a good research project: significant, innovative, and sound. Very important if you'd like it funded, also important for yourself, because you really want to do research that's worthwhile. I can't teach you how to do it. This is not a template. This is not an instruction book. It is a way of thinking that can be applied and that is very useful. I don't usually animate, but I have animated here because I want to highlight the objective. That's a term of art for the new knowledge that you are going to seek by doing a search in a scientific manner. That's what research is. A scientific research is a search made in a scientific manner for new knowledge people in need. The little asterisk points you to this little box. Axioms are things that everybody understands are true. They are not tested, they are not proven, they simply are obvious. When we say people need the knowledge, we should be able to specify it is these people who will need the knowledge. These people in these ways will benefit to this extent. You've got to be able to do that in order to be sure that you're not wasting your time. The significance of a research mostly comes from the significance of the new knowledge. Well, this little side line downward and to the left is a tautology. If it's recorded anywhere, it's not new. Just be a scholar. If it's not recorded anyway and you're sure, then you're going to do the research. Coming up on the left is much more important material. There are three kinds of knowledge. One is facts about the world as it is. It's called empiricism. The second is a way nature does something. You can't just observe that. You have to infer it. It's theoretical. It's imagined and then tested. The third one, invention, is similar. It's not here. It's the way we do something. You can imagine it, but then you build it and test it so you're really sure if it works or not. This one, you're never really sure. The idea of a scientific manner is that science is a profession and done by professionals. Think airline pilots, policemen, doctors, lawyers, clergy. You're trained to do things in the right way. In particular, you're trained to make measurements that will let you achieve your objective. They're called the specific aims and their verbs. Floating between them, and colored green for reasons you'll see later, is the true hypothesis, the jumping off point, what's under the foot, hypothesis. When you have your objective clear and the verbs, the actions you're going to take that will get you that objective, you have a jumping off point. There's a lot of imagination required to pick a good objective. There's a lot of skill and imagination to put the right methods, the right aims together so as to get it. And then you're ready to go to work. Now, the aims are a mixture of techniques, that's skills, methods, that's recipes. It will be reported in a literary structure called a scientific paper. And there's some very nice stuff by Thomas Kuhn, who's written about what a normal scientist is living, is a life lived. Virtually every ordinary normal scientist has a coterie of perhaps 25, 50 people around the world who are exactly doing the kind of stuff he, she is doing. They share theories, that's this sort of stuff, research needs, methods, techniques, and paradigms. Very important fairly recent accomplishments that have garnered interest and enthusiasm, and people spend their time testing it and elaborating on those paradigms. Now, I'd like to take you a little more into depth on empirical research, gathering facts from the world as it is. The deliberate change of font here, this is the etymology. It means literally a thing done. It's a past participle of the Latin word to do. So it's kind of a double entendre, right? It's a thing done when you get a fact from the world. What you did is get the fact. But you got the fact from something in the world which was done, wasn't it? Mountain, dragonfly, star, moon, caterpillar, me. What are the facts? They're measurements. Scientific facts are measurements made in a scientific manner from a sample of the objective world. Sample, of course, you don't do the whole world. Objective, meaning not subjective. The world of the senses, aided by whatever machinery you want, as it is. It's important that it be as it is because it's verifiable. Someone else can make a sample like yours, measure like you did, and should get what you got. Empiricism immediately draws you into the complexity of names. The facts, the measurements really, are a symbolic representation of real things, like a caterpillar or me. And all the things in the real world have names. And names are attached to things specified by certain facts. A thing may have many names. Let's consider Drew. Drew is an airline pilot. Drew is a life partner of someone else. Drew is a parent. Drew is a good house pianist. Drew has chronic lymphocytic leukemia. In other words, attached to Drew are many names, including the name of a disease. The problem of naming is actually a profound area in philosophy. I'm not skilled to teach it. We aren't here to study it or learn it. All I want to do is make it clear that it exists. What's this? I use blue for stuff like logic and stuff like measurements. Empirical axioms of cause. You can never prove a cause with empiricism, but you can get causal candidates. If causes accompany consequences, and if causes precede consequences, then if A is not before B, and A does not accompany B, then A does not cause B. This is not new. Anyone who's ever watched a mystery program, a murder mystery, a courtroom drama, knows all about this. That's why you establish who was where. That's what alibis are all about. It's usually put in the positive direction, but actually it's much more rigorous in this direction. You can kind of disprove. Actually, isn't that what you do when you get rid of perhaps a suspect? I call it axioms because everybody knows about it. However, importing it into empiricism generally isn't commonplace. A few very great scientists have done it. What's this and why is it red? I use red for the subjective mind, imagination, and stuff like that. You can't imagine about a star if you don't know facts about stars. You can't imagine well about me if you don't know facts about me. You can't imagine about anything in the real world if you don't know a lot of facts. So it's the ground of imagination. Well, what do we do with all the facts? We put it in the giant book, if you like, of human knowledge. Facts with their names and the context, that's all about how you got the information. And that's where you would look to see if the new knowledge you want to get is already here. Okay, that kind of closes the loop a little bit. Well, I talked about diseases having a name. Every disease is a named, empirical, theoretical, inventional construct. Let's do the white stuff. I use white for empirical. The manifestations, subjective sensations of illness, physical findings, the organs, the tissues, the cells, how they function, what they look like, and all the omes, the genome, the transcriptome, the proteome, the metabolome, the star ome, every ome, all taken together are the empirical construction, the empirical description of the particular disease. There are empirical causes: COVID, trauma, abnormal gene. This gene, 34A1 or whatever it is, has an amino acid translocation and it will not function as a phosphate transporter correctly. That means phosphate will be lost. Serum phosphate will be low. Bones won't mineralize because the calcium phosphate product is low. 125D will go up. Calcium absorption will go up in the intestine. Bone mineral turnover will go up. Parathyroid hormone will be suppressed by 125D. That will reduce renal calcium reabsorption. Urine calcium will go up. Blood calcium will go up because of the high inputs of calcium. Rickets will occur because the bone won't mineralize. I have just described a well-known disease that's all consequential to a phosphate transporter. But all those links I talked about are in red. Whoever sees phosphates suppress 125D so that low phosphate will have an increase 125D as a consequence. You may see it, but it may not be so simple as just the phosphate. Everything I just said is from theory, from great ideas, from experiments of all kinds, but they're not so visible as the gene amino acid substitution. I've put a triplet and a dipole here, similar to what I just rattled off: insulin resistance, protein glycation, high urine albumin. That's what people talk about in diabetes with renal disease. High systolic blood pressure, left ventricular hypertrophy. No one ever sees high systolic pressure causing LVH. It's inferred. It seems likely, but you have no direct way of seeing it, you see. That's why it's all in red. Empiricism, universally verifiable, facts from samples of the objective world. Inventions, tests and treatments. That's what goes with every disease. It's a bundle of them. Delimited verifiability from specific trials. Pathogenesis, the old term for the consecutively ordered events that lead from one thing to another till you get the manifestations. Provisionally verifiable, tested in experiments. Now, I want to take all this material and kind of schematize it for you in what I consider a very useful manner. And I want to put this schema to work in 3 examples. The first one, in white, comes from current time. I'm making all of it up. Governor Pritzker has decided that many people who live in the state of Illinois have cardiovascular disease and they're unrecognized. He wants to find them and get them better care. Well, that's an objective. Find the people in Illinois who have cardiovascular disease are unrecognized. Who will benefit? Those exact people. In what ways? Well, for goodness sake, you'll recognize they have diseases for which we have manifold treatments and preventions. To what extent? To the extent we get it early. So it's clearly significant, clearly beneficial. But how do you do it? Well, he calls upon epidemiologists from, let's say, the University of Illinois in Chicago and downstate, very powerful groups of epidemiologists, and says to them, do this. And they know how to do it. They know all the things you have to do to identify people with a disease. You have to sample around the state, and then you have to make measurements that have to do with cardiovascular disease. And so they need to go after facts related to cardiovascular disease in people sampled from around the state in a proper manner. Well, the objective is the people who are underserved, who have undisclosed, unrecognized cardiovascular disease. The working objective is tons of facts about people all over the state concerning cardiovascular disease. That's not what Governor Pritzker wants to see. He wants those facts to be collected by the scientists, sure, if that's what they do. And he wants them codified so an individual person with a name does or does not have the name cardiovascular disease attached to them. That's a long way from here to here. But this is what you have to work on. That's unworkable. So you see here the translation of an objective into a working objective, which is what you can actually create aims to get answers from. Now let's look at the colors. I've used yellow for the mind intellectual. It's already done the scholarship. I've put it to one side. It has created, isolated the correct aims because it's a profession. It has identified the correct working objective because it's a profession. And blue and yellow make green. And so we have the hypothesis. It's this set of objectives, this set of aims, and that is the pushing off point. Now, I want to go into a more interesting example. I'm going to set the clock back to 1949. There was a massive outbreak of cardiovascular disease in America, and the federal government let it be known that there is a need to find the causes of cardiovascular disease. Many, many scientists wanted to do this. And one particular one found a brilliant way to do it. He happened to be a guy, applied the axioms of cause. Well, what does that mean? He decided that he would go into the sample of the American people and search for facts, he's going to be an empiricist, that are present before cardiovascular disease is present and that associate with coming down with cardiovascular disease. So it fulfills both axioms of cause. Well, so what is he going to do? Well, he's going to get people properly sampled somewhere in America and make lots of measurements about cardiovascular disease before they have the disease, when they're normal. And he's going to watch some of them get the disease, others don't get the disease, and see which of those facts that were there before go with getting the disease. And so neither axiom of cause is violated, and he has candidate causes of cardiovascular disease. That person did that, and that was the Framingham Heart Study. And there was one person credited with the architecture of that work. Well, the work was done, and some years went by to get it done, obviously. And of all things, isolated systolic hypertension was one of the candidate causes. And that caused a bit of a stir. And at that point, doctors, everyone said, well, wait, we need to know if that if that's really true, I mean, is that really a cause? Now we come to, first of all, is it important? Well, sure. If it's really a cause, then in those people who have it, we're going to lower it. How are they going to benefit? Well, if you lowered it and it's a cause, you're going to stave off cardiovascular disease. No question about significance. But how are you going to do it? Well, the only way between the cause or the possible cause and a test is a logical construction called the modus tollens, the mode of denial. If this, then that. That being a necessary prediction of the presumed cause, and a prediction that can be tested by experiments or empiricism, one or the other. So what was this? Well, if the isolated systolic hypertension is a cause of cardiovascular disease, then lowering systolic pressure will lower cardiovascular disease onset. Lower it compared to what? Lower it compared to when you don't lower the systolic pressure. What's the objective? Counts. Counts of new cardiovascular disease. And with whom? Well, it's not empiricism. It's not the world as it is. We've changed people. We've treated half the people to lower their systolic pressure. We've left the other half alone. We're going to count and see if the one differs from the other. What's our aims? Get people who have this isolated systolic high blood pressure and don't have cardiovascular disease, treat half to lower the pressure, and count. Well, the counts are what you come for. It's the same old story. Working objectives are never what you want. But the counts tell you whether your theory, your cause, is really a cause. In each of the examples I've given you, it's a search for new knowledge. Each has been highly significant. Each has required innovation, the least innovation here for Governor Pritzker, because the way to do it is prescribed by the profession of epidemiology. Perhaps the most innovative was axioms of cause, used to find candidates. Reasonably innovative was to perform what we all now would call a trial of lowering blood pressure. Technical soundness, it's generally available to everyone who's well trained. Why do I have a star here? Well, the that, if this then that. The that is, in quotes, something that can be tested by experiment, an artificial world in which you've done things to people, or empiricism. You say, well, where can empiricism ever prove anything up? Well, generally not in medicine. But if you remember, when Einstein first came up with relativity, one of the first things he did was calculate the perihelion of Mercury and see if he was closer to it than Newton. He was. So empiricism can do it. Okay. Thomas Dauber died at an old age, nice age, in Naples, Florida. A good place for him. He was 92 years old and a lifetime sailor. It's a good place to live. His obit says that he was the chief architect of a great study. And the great study, the Framingham study, was different from any others because they studied normal people. And when people fell ill, he says, the researchers could look back in their records and deduce what prior health conditions could have helped the disease take hold. It's not an exact statement of really Dauber's great insight. Bill Cannell, who says that Dauber was the chief architect, was a big academic figure. Dauber actually was not. So when Cannell honors him this way, you should believe it. I do. In 1961, Dauber authored a landmark paper and isolated risk factors for heart disease: high blood pressure, cholesterol, cardiac changes, smoking. this was the first example of the concept of a risk factor. It had never been talked about before. It had never been done. No one had ever before applied the axioms of empirical cause till Dauber. Framingham study by the time of Dauber's death was very successful. It's still going on. And in fact, today, all the various ohms are being done on the generations of people living now whose priors were in the original Framingham study. A moment of blank screen to pull ourselves together. And what I'd like to do now is show you both of these great studies, the empirical demonstration of a likely cause, and then the logic behind the crucial trial, precisely in the format that I've shown you, in the actual words and manner of how it was done, to make clear that what I'm telling you is not airy generalization. It is, in fact, real life. In 9350, Dauber presented this work to the American Society of Epidemiology. It is the architectural plan of the Framingham study, which was as yet nothing much. He was drawing the picture. He begins his talk by pointing out that epidemiology, epidemos, is not just plague that comes in from the outside, but it's kind of the ecology of disease, the where, the when, the who, and so forth and so on. Not the most exciting thing to say, I must say. He then goes on and quotes Wade Hampton Frost. Here's his dates, here's what he did. Johns Hopkins chair. He quotes Frost's comment here in quotes. Frost says, epidemiology includes the orderly arrangement of facts into chains of inference which extend more or less beyond the bounds of direct observation. Well, now what is Frost talking about? Orderly arrangement into chains. Well, chains are links, one after another. So the facts are being arranged one after the other to make an inference. Well, what is he talking about? He's talking about cause, of course. It's beyond what you measure. This was a beautiful and very early statement of the import into high science of what's in every murder mystery. Here is Dauber's words. He's concerned with heart disease. So he says, as a working hypothesis, I don't like his use of the word here, but it's okay. As an imagination, I imagine that the heart diseases are not just single cause like plague, but that they are the result of multiple causes. Oh, that's interesting. Which, look at this, work slowly within the individual. That's the insight. It's not the worm in the rose. It's the rose. Rose Marie runs marathons. She's great. She's 30. Her friend next door runs with her, Mary Beth. In 20 years, Rose Marie will have a heart attack. Mary Beth will never have one. It's like that. Well, what's he going to do? Well, he's going to do epidemiology, and it's based on populations of normal composition, including both the sick and the well as they are found in the community. Wow! A perfect statement of empiricism. Just what I said. Well, what's he actually going to do? Well, he's going to get these normal people, and they'll be observed over years. He's going to get facts from them over the years until a sizable number have acquired the disease. At that time, they'll make a search for which of the facts go with getting the disease. That's how you know it influenced the development of disease. What are factors? Facts that acted. Actors. Facts. Fact actors. Factors. Now I'd like to put this brilliant architectural insight in its original words under the right-hand side, the empirical side of the diagram I gave you, What's the public-facing or significant objective? Causes of cardiovascular disease. Great. What is the use of the empirical axiom? They are the result of causes which work slowly with the individual. We're going to use the axiom directly. If multiple causes within slowly produce cardiovascular disease, then those normals who develop cardiovascular disease must display these causal factors before and when they display cardiovascular disease. Great. Well, what are we going to get as a working objective? That's what the dashed line here is. Factors, fact actors, the facts in normals who do versus who do not subsequently display cardiovascular disease. Is that this? No. That's not at all this. This is the causes. This is a bunch of facts. But the right facts can be, in fact, factors. What are the aims? Well, he said it. Take the normals, observe them. Some will and some will not get disease. Aim 1, perform sequential clinical and laboratory measurements of normal adults. Aim 2, when a significant fraction of manifest disease, determine which prior measurements associate with onset of cardiovascular disease. Couldn't be simpler. His words are better and fewer than mine. Of crucial note, the two sides of the objective, the public-facing or significant objective, and the working objective, i.e. in the form of the objective, that gives you measurable outcomes. The hypothesis to put together, of course. It's a tremendous act to be able to see that you could realistically do this and to have understood this kind of logic might get you what you really want. This slide is a kind of sidelight slide, but worthwhile. The specific aims as you write them are the logical requirements of the objective abstracted from the reality of their enactment. You don't write more than the logical requirements, because if you do, the page of specific aims becomes unusable. I've rewritten the aims here, underlined obvious places where you have to make great specifications, like what does sequential mean? Which measurements? Why? What do you mean by normal? What do you mean by sufficient? What do you mean by manifested? What do you mean by associate? All this has to be spelled out. The tasks, the sequence, the budget, the methods, the techniques to realize each component. It is the reality of the enactment of the logical specific aims. Where does it show up? The research plan. The research plan is page after page of stuff. I began in a deliberately sloppy and boring way the draft of how I would write a research plan to do this. It was actually a book. The research plan takes off of the early parts of a research design all of this stuff. But you have to have the expertise. You have to be able to do this, or you won't be able to make any progress. Well, here it is. This is what they isolated. Isolated systolic hypertension. They found it. Up till that point, 1980, the world had focused on diastolic pressure. Everybody knew high diastolic pressure kills you. Encephalopathy, kidney failure, pulmonary edema, heart failure, horribly dangerous. Unless it was corrected, you were going to die. Everybody also knew everybody's grandma had a blood pressure of 100 plus their age. And they knew why. Normal aging stiffens the blood vessels. And so when the heart beats and pushes the blood in, very fine mathematicians pointed out, you'll take the free energy within the pulse wave and you'll change the contour. It'll be sharper and taller, but the area of the pulse wave will be the same. It just changes the configuration. Everything is done. It's just normal aging. Well, here's what they found. This is prevalence. men and women, age, and it goes up with age. Isolated systolic hypertension. Okay, well, great. 2-year incidence rate of cardiovascular disease in this age range, rate per thousand, 113 and 50.3 for men and women. Great, so what? What's the factor of increased risk? Increased compared to what? The folks who don't have isolated systolic hypertension, 3.5. What's the dagger mean? Very, very, very significant. Okay, well, what about, that doesn't matter. What about the stiffness? The stiffness will give you the same thing. The stiffness is cardiovascular disease. Well, they use pulse wave analysis to determine the stiffness of the vessels. It correlated without a p-value. In women, it didn't even show up. Systolic blood pressure did. What's this? Well, there was another theory abroad. When the systolic pressure goes up, there's more variability. And that kind of up and down movement of the systolic pressure damages the vessel walls. And so the lability is what's really doing it. Well, that didn't pan out at all. This is routine multiple logistic coefficients. So really, is age and systolic pressure really make all the difference? Well, that was your candidate. And by 1991, the study was done. What study? The test, the part in red. It had become obvious everywhere that systolic pressure had to be tested. What if it was a cause of heart disease, cardiovascular disease? What if that were true? Well, then, for God's sake, there's millions and millions of people that need to be treated that aren't being treated. The study was mounted. It was done at 17 centers all around America by very, very fine investigators. I had one of the investigators, a friend of mine, Henry Black, who was PI of the Yale Center. And way back in 2012, I've been interested in this work for years. I've taught it for 20 years. And so actually, it's no surprise that I was chatting with Henry Black about this study. I asked Henry about the study, not just, a little bit about the personal aspects. And he told me something really interesting. Before they launched, but after the design, after they knew they could do it, they did a straw poll. Half the directors thought this trial was going to blow up. A bunch of dead grandparents, a national scandal. It would be shut down in less than 6 months. It was a terrible idea, and they didn't want to do it. But they did do it. Actually did it. Just a slide or so to show how beautifully they did it. It's your groups, 5 years. They lowered the systolic pressure from 160 to 140, hardly what we call a nice pressure today. The diastolic didn't fall at all. And this is the stroke rate, cumulative stroke rate per 100 participants over the follow-up interval. That's the placebo arm. That's the treatment arm. P less than 10 to the minus 3, oh yeah. 10 to the minus 4, yeah. 10 to the minus 5, probably. All right, when you do something like this and you radically alter the medical world, you repeat it, and it was repeated multiple times. And as many of you know, long after that work, multiple trials have looked to see how low you should really make the systolic pressure. Down to what? Presently, 130 is the borderline for not good. 125 to 130 is questionable. Under 125 is probably great. Most physicians I know like to see 115. So these two events, the detection of isolated systolic hypertension as a potential cause and an experiment using modus tollens and conducted correctly, radically altered healthcare medical treatment for millions of people everywhere, to the point where today there's no question. Now I want to take the Shep trial and put it on my schema once again to show the schema will include and support that kind of work, and therefore any kind of work. Looking for a cause, systolic blood pressure in isolated systolic hypertension, in fact, it causes. Why stroke? Because that's what you can actually work with. All the blood pressure trials are stroke trials. And where does this come from? Well, it's the objective is to determine if this cause is true. Is it a cause? Here's the modus tollens. If the systolic pressure in ISH causes stroke, then lowering systolic pressure must lower stroke rate. And that's the form of the modus tollens. What's the working objective? We know this objective causes stroke. What's this? Counts. Actually, counts of new strokes in previously healthy people with ISH, treated or not, to lower systolic blood pressure. What are the aims? You could read them yourself. Count the strokes in those with and untreated. Compare the counts. That's exactly what they did. What if the answer had been no? What if the counts didn't differ? Then this cause would be falsified. It would be defeated. And you move on. Well, what does it mean that it wasn't? Well, it means that for now, there's nothing wrong with this, and we should use it. Does it mean truly the physical pressure causes a stroke? No. It means what we did is not incompatible with that. But it may not be the systolic blood pressure. There may be some hidden transmitter somewhere in the vasculature somewhere where that peak does something that does something that does something that does something that causes stroke. And it isn't really the cause. It just also causes the systolic pressure to go up. We don't know. We just have that right now as something that works and deserves use. Now, I've made this kind of closing figure because I think it's useful. On the right-hand side is the research publication. On the left-hand side is the research grant. I've put the wonderful empirical cause finding of Dauber, cause of cardiovascular disease, as a public-facing significant objective. The empirical axioms are the logical structure that can take you to a working objective. Facts in normals cause disease. We could search for them, and this is how we would search. It makes a working hypothesis. It's just how Dauber did it. Where will you find this in the paper? It's the introduction. How long would it take? About a page and a quarter on the paper. What would it look like if you typed it in those nasty little narrow margins we do for page ones and kind of a font 11? It wouldn't fill the page. And yet, if anyone wrote a page of that blazing quality, a study section, a group of intelligent scientists would instantly recognize it for what it is. And there'd be hardly any debate. The methods section takes the tasks in their sequence. That's the research plan and the techniques and the methods. And then there's always preliminary results to show that things can be done. There were in the Shep trial. And then the results of the study, which would have been the Shep paper in 1991, you saw them. And then the results versus the hopes that you're going to change medical treatment once and for all. Now, if we have time, I would like to view these accomplishments through two lenses. That of Thomas Kuhn, these are his dates, in his one book, Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Here's a picture of him. Here's Kuhn's ruling paradigm in cardiovascular circles before Dauber's work. Only diastolic pressure causes cardiovascular disease. And that is well established. And normal science studied diastolic pressure, mechanisms of this pressure, how diastolic pressure could cause disease, how you would treat diastolic pressure, and so on and so on and so on. As times went on, doing the course of regular work, a guy like Dauber comes along and finds an anomaly. Systolic pressure may be the cause. Does that completely upset the ruling paradigm? Absolutely not. However, it sends a quiver through the field, no question about that. And it stimulates other scientists to do extraordinary science, by which I mean aim at falsifying a crucial prediction of the ruling paradigm. Well, a crucial prediction is, if you really tested this, systolic pressure per se should not cause cardiovascular disease. Well, the Shep trial falsifies that and changes the paradigm. So it's a true revolution. Karl Popper lived much longer life in The Logic of Scientific Discovery, presents a much gloomier and a much more mental and intellectual picture. He is not at all a historian of science. He has no interest in empiricism per se. He's in the line of Bacon, Hume, Kant, Wittgenstein, Bertrand Russell, Kripke. He's interested in the logic of epistemology, of scientific discovery. He's a philosopher of epistemology, theory of knowledge. In his view, all important things are theory, and theory consists of all statements that have survived tests designed to falsify them. Well, what's an all statement? Systolic pressure causes stroke. High systolic pressure causes stroke. When? All the time. What does that mean? You treat it all the time. What are you saying? I'm saying you treat it everywhere you see it. It's an all statement. It survived a test designed to falsify it. You test all statements with singular statements deduced via the modus tollens, which you've already seen enough that you don't need to see it again, and which are falsifiable in principle. Lowering systolic blood pressure must lower stroke. It must. That's a singular statement. That's the Shep trial. Dashed line is, they did that. The answer was high systolic pressure indeed does cause cardiovascular disease. Yes, that all statement held up through a test. In Popper's view, all new knowledge of the world, beyond what you can do empirically, consists of the all statements that have survived falsification. The darkness of it is, if it's not falsified, it doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean what it says when I say all. It's true until a smarty pants comes along and shows it's not true. And in his rather, I shouldn't say negative, but skeptical mind, every all statement will be overturned sometime by somebody somewhere. But so long as it's survived, for all reasons, you should use it. Popper also says, for reasons you can imagine, that science does not progress towards some ultimate truths about the cosmos, about the world, about the universe. There is no such thing. We will never have that knowledge. All we'll ever have are all statements that have survived, some supplanting others, on into, I presume in his mind, forever. Thank you very much. and good afternoon.